appreciate your consideration.
O'Brien's my name. I represent Dylan Voller.
Mr O'Brien.
After the 21st of August 2014, you received an email the following weekend on the 23rd of August 2014 from Dr. Howard Barth.
Correct.
And that email invited you to have a conference with him, which you did a short time later. Is that right?
If memory serves me, I phoned him on the weekend. I could stand corrected and I said, come into my office. So he was there within a few days.
And when he sat you down, he showed you a report?
A draft report, yes.
And you were able to see from it that there were still pictures of a child being, in your mind at that time, treated in a manner which you thought was inappropriate, correct?
I went so far as to say criminal.
Yes, and you said, I think in your evidence, that you were shocked by what you saw.
I was.
Yeah.
As many other people were when they saw it.
On television more recently.
That's right.
And you came to realise, I expect, that all of the, and perhaps in that meeting with Dr. Barth, that all of those incidents occurred related to the one child.
I didn't know it at the time. I've got to say that, like you and other people, when you first see that information, you go, my goodness gracious me, and it's somewhat distracting. But I wasn't aware it was the single child. But subsequent to that time, I think that most of the matters referred around or orbited around your client. Certainly by October the following month, so some weeks later, you knew that all of those incidents involved Dylan Voller, didn't you? When I learned that, I'm not entirely sure, but can I say this is that Dylan Voller's name, even at that time, wasn't unknown to me. Thank you. And when your attention was drawn to that report, it wasn't only incidents of physical aggression that Howard Barth was drawing to attention. There were other issues associated with that report. He said that there were a number of other issues that were of concern to him, yes. I remember him talking to me about that. And some of those other issues included use of excessive periods of isolation. My memory of that conversation, what other issues, I took it to mean that there were other issues of violence. Yep. And you said to, well, I suggest to you that according to Dr. Barth, I want you to accept this. Dr. Barth says that on the 20th of August, the day before the incident, he received a complaint from children in his capacity as Children's Commissioner about children being housed in inhumane conditions at Dondale within the BMU. You understand that? I accept that he's given that evidence. That's what he says. Okay. Now, he says the next day he hears about the incident, the gassing incident within the BMU. You accept that? Yes. Then within 2 days of that, he's in contact with you to find out, to have an urgent meeting. That's right. You understand that? That is correct. It is inconceivable, Mr. Elferink, that he didn't raise with you during that meeting the issue of isolation and the issue of the housing of children within inhumane conditions at the BMU. My recollection of that meeting was that my focus was on the criminal acts. The problem is we're having the conversation, he's sitting on my couch, I'm sitting opposite him, I'm flicking through this report going, goodness gracious me. Yes. Probably a few other things. He's raising a number of issues with me. He's saying he has a number of concerns. Yeah, and okay, could I ask you this? Did he say within that meeting, did he tell you that, I withdraw that. It's possible. I withdraw that. You said to him, go and take them to the police. This is serious. Yeah, absolutely. That's right? Yeah. Okay, because you felt he had an immediate and mandatory obligation under the law to bring that to the police's attention, correct? Yes. Okay. Did he tell you, I've done that, and indeed, within this very report that I'm showing you, I'm suggesting there are failures to report matters to the police by the workers within the department? Did he tell you that? What he told me is that he was aware of a number of issues and that he wanted to have an inquiry. He said he wanted $300,000 to run that inquiry. And another feature that I'm suggesting to you that he said was that that the department workers were obfuscating and hindering police investigations. He mentioned that to you. I remember him making those sorts of comments in relation to a matter. Yes. So
when you are confronted with this image, these images that depict something so shocking that you think you've got to immediately speak to the police about this, Dr. Barth, in the same breath he's telling you, well, I've done that, and in addition to that, the department are hindering police investigations. He mentioned that to you, didn't he?
Yes, specifically, if memory serves me, in relation to the matter of Mr Tasker. He assumes, incorrectly I might add, that I was aware that other matters were also being investigated at that stage.
I'll come to that matter shortly, if time permits. But look, I want to suggest to you that it was highly irregular and extraordinary that the Children's Commissioner sought an urgent briefing. You'd accept that, wouldn't you?
Irregular and extraordinary? No, I get urgent briefings from any number of commissioners, both within the public service and outside of them.
And the reason that he wanted to talk to you about this urgent briefing is that he felt that there were systemic factors that led up to the BMU gassing incident on the 21st of August 2014.
My recollection, he was concerned about systemic abuse.
Systemic abuse and systemic issues associated with the Department of
particularly
Corrective Services.
systemic abuse, yes.
And so when he brought these matters to your attention and you saw these shocking images, did you think to yourself, what's happened to the children? Where are they at now? Or what's happened to the child? Where is he at now? Did you think that to yourself?
That's certainly one of my considerations, which is why within moments of having that meeting with Mr Barth and saying go and report what you know to the police, he also mentioned other matters, I might add. I said take it to the police. Then, of course, my next telephone call is to the Commissioner of Corrections.
And did you say, where is this child, or where are these children who are subject matter in this report that I've just received? Did you ask that question of your Commissioner?
Absolutely, I did. I said, Commissioner, what's going on? Please explain it. He then told to me that many of the matters in that report were historical, and at that point I started to discover that there were further investigations on foot, had been on foot and dealt with.
You've told this Royal Commission, Mr Elferink, that you were shocked and you were in a position where you thought what you saw, and you're a police officer of 14 years standing, what you saw was criminal in those pictures, and yet you accepted the Commissioner's view, oh, it's all historical, forget about it, Minister, just don't worry about those children.
That is not correct.
Okay.
You can't make
Well, what did you do for the welfare of those children after you saw that report, Minister?
I commissioned the Vita report so that I could find out whether or not we had systematic abuse of children in the system.
What did you do for the immediate welfare of the children or the child depicted in those photographs that you saw that so shocked you?
I said to the Commissioner that he had a responsibility to make sure that all criminal matters were investigated and these kids were properly looked after.
And by 3 weeks' time, you'd realised, hadn't you, that the Commissioner was making some pretty serious allegations in relation to police hindrance of police investigations. That's the case, isn't it?
And that's right, which is one of the reasons I wanted Mr Barth to go back to the Commissioner of Police, and my understanding is that that's exactly what he did.
And so when you read those reports in relation to the hindering of police investigations and possibly making false affidavits sworn against police officers who've given completely inconsistent accounts to the accounts given to the Children's Commissioner, did you think to yourself, these people need to be further investigated and this needs to be referred to the police? Did you do that?
The matter had been referred to the Commissioner, and I understood that Major Crime was investigating.
You didn't find out exactly where Dylan Voller was in the days after you'd seen those shocking images, did you?
Not specifically, but bearing in mind that the images that were in that report were already old by a number of years, yes. My insistence with the Commissioner was make sure that we provide appropriate care, which he was trying to do.
You could understand, regardless of the criminality of it, what you saw shocked you, and you understood there was some trauma associated with each of those instances upon the child at the time. It must have been the case.
Potentially, yes. There was certainly potential trauma, and I sought assurances from the Commissioner that these kids were being looked after as best they could.
So you weren't told then that Mr Voller spent the next 3 days in isolation in the adult jail, I imagine?
If you're talking about the gassing incident...
After the gassing incident?
Yeah, well, that was certainly not covered by the Children's Commissioner when he came to me and spoke to me. The report he showed had not a single mention from memory about the gassing incident.
And did your Commissioner tell you that the next 3 months after he went to the New Holtz Detention Centre, he spent those 3 weeks, officers who've given completely inconsistent accounts to the accounts given to the... running
of prisons in the Northern Territory to the experts in the field.
You didn't find those things out because you didn't care. You didn't care to.
I wonder if my friend might like to ask one question at a time and put a full stop after each sentence. Otherwise, I object.
Well, I've been given 15 minutes to cover this cross-examination. I'm doing my best I can. I understand this witness has been in the witness box a long time, but I'm under pressure too, as the Commission. We've got to get through this, and I'm doing my very best in difficult circumstances.
I think the complaint simply was just one question at a time, Mr. O'Brien.
What was the last question?
You didn't care about the welfare of these children, did you?
That is not correct.
It was just, they were to your mind, just rat bags or worse.
That's not correct.
They were to your mind, perhaps, as your Chief of Staff expressed in the months later, just little cunts.
I certainly didn't agree with that, and I don't agree with that now.
You see, your party's political agenda prevailed over the welfare of these children, didn't it?
Yes, and I sought to improve the system post-August 2014, which is why I had the VETA review done and made sure that we made substantive changes to the system. I refer you to the annual report 2015-16, which over a number of pages describes the improvements and systemic changes that were introduced.
Well, I want to go to one of those systemic changes. Can we have Exhibit 324 on the screen, please? This is the list of goodies, as I've described it, that you've put to the Chief Minister through his advisor. We've seen this a few times. Now, you've seen item number 7, greater restraint powers in juvenile detention, current. See that? Now, by current, you know that was something that was at that time being considered, correct?
Yes.
And what you meant by restraint powers is the use of restraint chair, correct?
What I meant was restraint powers. Whatever mechanism is used is a matter of expertise for departmental officials. The legislative instrument that I introduced with the support of the criminal lawyers of the Association of the Northern Territory sought to create greater clarity around the powers of restraint. If the body attached to that legislative instrument sought fit to introduce a restraint chair or a safety chair, that was a matter for the experts in the field.
You see, it's a matter of common knowledge within this Royal Commission's purview that the legality or use of the restraint chair was a matter of some legal ambiguity. You accept that?
I remember being advised at the time that the legislation was broad and unhelpful. As a consequence, the department wanted it tightened up, and so did I.
And were you aware at that time that there was concerns that the use of the restraint chair up until the passing of the legislation enabling it as a restraint was a question of some legality? Indeed, it was thought to be illegal.
I'm not, certainly wasn't advised at the time. I know it's come up in the Royal Commission. It's a matter for this Commission and courts to concern themselves with going forward. At the time, I certainly was unaware of it. What I was aware of was that the use of restraints were not properly governed by legislation.
You see, the use of the term greater restraint powers in juvenile justice as opposed to what you said in evidence, which was a rationalisation of restraint powers, would suggest that you indeed knew, at that time at least, 21st of March 2016, that the law was needed to be broadened and expanded in order to allow the use of the restraint chair, which was in fact already happening for children.
The legislation was introduced for the purposes of making sure there was greater clarity around the powers that existed for the use of any form of restraint.
When you did involve yourself in the legislative enabling the use of the restraint chair, was there any psychiatric or psychological studies used to evaluate the use of restraint chairs upon children?
I don't recall there was any, no.
There was none, correct?
I don't recall any.
Did you come to be aware of any studies or any thesis on the harm that these sort of chairs might cause a young person?
No,
in your
I
custody?
wasn't. But once again, the powers that were being introduced did not single out restraint chairs. They created a committee to oversight appropriate restraint. That comes in many forms.
Did you hear the evidence of Dylan Voller in relation to when he was asked by a senior counsel assisting us the impact that the restraint chair had on him at that time?
I didn't. However, I understand that in his instance it was used to protect himself from self-harm.
Do you understand that he'd made threats to self-harm but had not carried out any threats? Is that your understanding of the situation, or do you not understand the situation fully?
Well, my understanding of the situation is that he'd made threats, and as a consequence of that, he was restrained from causing himself harm and consequently didn't. He
indeed did make threats to hurt himself, and this is how he said he felt when he was placed in the chair. This is at transcript 711.25. I was just that stressed, I was just sobbing, and at the end of it, I could hardly even talk. My body just shut down. I couldn't be bothered fighting anymore, so I just sat there. He went on to say, it was the most scary thing that had ever happened to me. Do you understand that those are words of a child involved in this chair that you, without any evidence, any research or empirical studies to suggest helped these children, that's what he suffered, that's what he went through. Do you understand that?
Yeah, but you can't draw that conclusion. I didn't authorise the use of the restraint chair. I created a legislative instrument that enabled experts to determine what reasonable force was, and then left that decision as to what reasonable force was to those experts, including the chair, but amongst other things.
That policy, like so many of the things you did through your time as Minister for Corrective Services in relation to children, was heartless. It was ill-considered, and it was ultimately, for these children, damaging.
My position was simply that I wanted to leave the experts with sufficient powers available to them to protect not only the community and other children in the institutions, but also staff and ultimately your client.
Your record, sir, I suggest to you, is testament to putting the welfare last in favour of political expedience and populism.
What you'll find is that...
Well, it's making a... You can... Mr Harris, Mr Elferink can respond whether he accepts or doesn't accept that comment that's been made.
I'll put it again, Commissioner.
No, you don't need to put it again. I think Mr Elferink...
I don't accept the comment. The introduction of things like OPCAT, the attempt to get independent observers into the system, the changes that I made to Dondale, particularly after the events of August. The legislative change that you describe was actually supported by the Criminal Lawyers Association of the Northern Territory. The work being done in the adult system in relation to sentence to a job and getting better outcomes for adult prisoners as well. All of those things are indicative of what I did. Grasping at a list prepared for the Chief Minister and pulling something out, I would simply say this to you, is that I stand on what I did, not what I said.
Yeah, you should be judged on what you did. Is that the case?
Absolutely. When it comes to things like sentence to a job, improving the juvenile justice system, creating safety for your client amongst other people in the juvenile justice system.
Nothing further.
Thanks, Mr O'Brien. Thank you.